You ever look at a game's description and wonder if someone made it specifically for you? Because I found me a point-and-click game set almost entirely in a Scottish village. That's a rare thing to see in video games at the best of times, at least compared to all those video games set in large American cities. And when you narrow it down to classic adventure games with a Scottish location, you're left with that bit in Broken Sword? Clandestiny? Point is, it's rare enough that games visit Scotland, let alone spend the majority of their time there. Anyway, the game I'm actually here to talk about is Fey Fever. At least I'm guessing that it's meant to rhyme with hay fever. There's no voice acting in the game to confirm that. Also, I don't think they would have a reason to say the title at any point. This comes to us from Monkey Wizard Entertainment, available on Steam and itch.io. Seems to be Windows only, despite using the Unity engine, but that is tempered somewhat by the fact that the game is completely free. So that's about an hour's entertainment for none of your human currencies. Look, there's a good chance this is going to be a biased account, because this game charmed me pretty hard, and not just because it's set in Scotland. Even though the development team is based in Sweden, which means I'm doubly surprised and delighted that they used the word Sassenach correctly. Sassenach. No, I'm not going to tell you what it means. By the way, you might notice that this main menu footage looks a little different from everything else you're about to see. That's because this is in 1440p. If you bump it up to 4K, the main menu looks like this. No idea what's causing it, but I've let the developers know and haven't noticed any other egregious problems running at 4K, so that's what the rest of the video will contain. Anyway, here's the story. This is Alice Taylor. She's a journalist on the phone to her boss regarding a missing person lead that she wants to follow. And by wants to follow, I mean she's already travelled all the way from London to the small Scottish town of Glenrock. No, it's not a real place. A bit hasty, yes, and Joseph the boss man is clearly concerned for Alice's well-being, but he ultimately gives her his blessing. Albeit very, very begrudgingly. You soon find out where this concern comes from, both in the case of Joseph to Alice and Alice to her source. Difference being that Alice's source has now also gone missing, and Joseph knows about Alice's previous problems with a scandal of some kind and, perhaps more pressingly, her problems with alcohol. The game doesn't go too far into the alcoholism angle. I don't think they even use that word in particular. It more informs the character in the story, but it does come up in the plot a few times, and it's on the front page of the journal for the entire length of the game, just so you know. Now, to make my earlier point clear, this is a short game. It took me around an hour to complete. What you can expect in that time is a set of situations to navigate. Some conversations, some robbing of items, some conflation of codes, and some decisions to make. And it really does feel like you're being specifically guided from situation to situation sometimes. There's a world to explore, yes, but it's a tiny town with a bare minimum number of people to talk to, not much to find off the beaten path here. Again, probably the limitations of a free game that are simply made more obvious by the short length. Honestly, a lot of the praise I have does come with the caveat of, I'd like to see this in a longer game, and I realise that might come off as a backhanded compliment. I don't mean for it to sound that way, but I've committed myself to telling you what this game is like to play. This doesn't mean that I want to ignore the fact that a team of people offered up their own time, effort and money to give the world something to play for free. I just don't want to start making excuses for things I think can be improved. With that in mind, I'd like a long block of praise between here and the conclusion, so I'll get my other negative out of the way. I'd like to see a bigger difference between the pointer / this does nothing cursor and the open hand / grab or use a thing cursor. Actually, that gets the obligatory nitpick out of the way too. Nice. On to the good stuff. I really like both the fact that this game gives you a journal to keep track of what you've learned, and I really like the way in which that journal is written. Alice may be a journalist, but these are the notes of a detective. Information about the village, the people, and obviously the case itself. And this all gets updated as new information comes in a very natural way. You don't unlock a new page of the journal, nothing that clinical. The new info gets scrolled into the next logical space in the notebook. Granted, it might be a little harder to spot which parts are new and which aren't, but personally I didn't have a problem with that when I played. Which the short length may have contributed to, of course, not enough time for it to get overly complex and all that. By the way, you have the option of choosing an easy to read font in the settings. This is a great feature. I think we should see more of it. Whenever possible, of course, since implementing this means you need to test every single place that any text appears in to make sure it doesn't go off the edge of the screen or something. Still, great accessibility feature. Anyway, back to the journal. I love the look of this thing. The way it's written and consequently iterated on helps show us who Alice is and how she works. Small margin notes, physical evidence taped inside, it all feels quite natural. It also tells us more about Alice and the somewhat fragile state she's in. She hasn't travelled 2/3 of the way up the entire country on a whim, it's out of desperation, and the game reflects that with more than mere words. Right down to the character art, where she always looks like she's ready to run off at a moment's notice. I like this touch, not just because it's a less clunky and obvious delivery method than dialogue, but because it touches like that tell me that the developer cared about the character they were crafting. That's nice to see. It's backed up by the music as well. There's a mix of mystery, fantasy, horror, and plain old spoopy weird, all crafted from pianos, strings, maybe a xylophone or something, and the occasional sound effect. Pretty simple and pretty effective. Subtle enough to stay in the background, but strong enough to leave no question about how the main character feels. Scared, alone, and uncertain. I can't say the storytelling extends to gameplay as well, but I feel like that's a much harder thing to do, and the gameplay is pretty good by itself. A one-button interface for a game that really needs nothing more than a one-button interface, good idea that. Your inventory and journal buttons are up in the top left, not getting in the way. Hotspots are shown by a cursor change and a subtle highlight when hovered over. About the only fancy thing in the main gameplay is the occasional object you'll be asked to click and drag. Well, that and a couple of full-screen puzzles. The ones that spring to mind are entering a code on a keypad, nothing extravagant, it's exactly what it sounds like, and one that's a little more complex, a lock-picking puzzle that probably extended my playtime by a full 15 minutes. Of course, it was my choice to do it that way. The game gives you some options for how you approach the challenges you face, and this was one of the two. You can even see the consequences of some of those actions, and it's done neither in a overly intrusive, lock you down a certain path kind of way, nor a completely pointless one. This is really difficult to describe without giving spoilers, and yeah, I might actually be making an excuse here, but it's easier to play a short game again to try different choices and get different endings where the time investment is so low. So perhaps that's why it felt pretty inoffensive yet somewhat rewarding as an implementation to me. Like I said, I was charmed pretty hard by this game. There's a lot to like here. The fact that it's available for free only lowers my defences even further. And it makes me excited to see what else the team attempts in future. Maybe that was the entire point. A simple free game to get everyone's interest. Or maybe it was simply a game they were all excited to put out into the world. Either way, it's here now, I like it, and I think it's a pretty good way to spend an hour. Hey, me again. Thanks for watching to the end. If you like what I'm doing here, there's the like button and the subscribe button for finding out when I'm doing more of these. There's also the dislike button in that general vicinity, up to you. And if you really like what I'm doing here and can afford it, I do have a Patreon which is linked in the description below. So anyway, thanks again, and I shall see you again soon.